I'm an oldest, so you're first out of the chute. It's 2005, and I'm in the driveway of my parents' home in Newark, New York. Same house we grew up in, 4 doors down from the cemetery, right-hand side, big white house. And I'm there because my mom has called me. She's 74 years old, and she's scheduled for a total hip replacement in the next few weeks. And she wants to go down to Murphy's, and that's not Murphy's Bar, it's Murphy's Funeral Home, because she wants to make her arrangements in case something happens, Susan. Okay, so that might sound a little dramatic to some, a little alarming, or even morbid, but it didn't bother me. What really shocked me was that she hadn't done this already. You see, my father was a mortician, and I've been around the funeral business all my life. My dad's name was Leo, and his friends called him Digger. There were 8 of us kids in the family: Susan, Gigi, Teresa, Margaret, Leanne, Matthew, Mary, and Christopher. I'm the oldest. And we didn't grow up in the funeral home. My dad worked for a funeral director. But that business permeated all of our lives. I can remember growing up and we would have these beautiful flower arrangements in the house. Gladiolas in a spray presentation. We'd pluck the ribbons out and use them for sashes when we played beauty pageant. Sometimes we'd walk down to the funeral home after school to catch a ride home with Dad. And while we were waiting, we'd do some little chores around the funeral home, like dusting or vacuuming. And it was always a little peek around the casket, is that person really dead? Or we kind of meander back to the casket display room. And kids will play with what's available. So we would look at the liner displays. Oh, I love this color. We pick out our favorite caskets. And that would usually devolve into a case of hide and seek or I dare you to get in. Being a mortician means being on call 24/7. So there were 2 sets of phones in our house. There was the family phone and there was the funeral. And sometime around middle school, my father got the idea that we could answer the call. So you'd hear the funeral phone ring, and you'd pick it up, and you'd hear this tiny voice saying, "Parker Rayfield Funeral Home, how can I help you?" When we went off to college, the way that you got home was by Greyhound bus or Trailways. And we quickly learned to decline Dad's offer to come pick us up. And you might answer why. Because there's nothing like your father pulling up with a hearse to the dorm. And he wasn't the only person in the hearse. So my dad had an amazing collection of neckties. There had to be 100 neckties in that closet. And they were silk and linen and beautiful colors. But us kids never, oh, I'm short, sorry. Okay. Us kids never gave Dad a tie. What would happen is that families would be so appreciative for the care and the understanding that he gave them in making arrangements at this grief time, that they would gift him with a tie from their dad, their grandfather, their uncle. I don't think my dad wore the same tie twice, and he saved them all. So I'm back in the driveway with my mom, and I'm helping her into the car, and I'm going around to the driver's side, and I see Dad walk out of the barn. And he says, "Where are you going?" And I look at my mother, and she won't make eye contact. And she's got the windows rolled up. So I turned back to Dad, and I said, "Well, Mom wants to go down to Murphy's and make her arrangements in case something happens." And he's, "Nothing's going to happen to your mother, and she's going to be fine." And I said, "I agree, Dad. I totally agree. But it's not a bad idea to get this done." So then I thought, well, let's poke the bear, let's whack that bee's nest, and I'll ask the $1,000,000 question. "What do you want, Dad?" And there is silence. I don't want to give my money to some GD funeral director. I want to be cremated. And no calling hours, because that costs money. And don't use that place in Rochester, because they charge too much, Susan. Bring me to Yates County. There's a cheap place over there. So now it's either an epiphany or a mild cerebral hemorrhage that I realize that this is a first conversation for both of my parents. It's a classic case of do as I say, not as I do. Because Leo the mortician would come home after a couple of funerals and be just berserk. Jesus, everybody's fighting, nobody knows what they want. People make plans to buy a house, they make plans to go out to dinner, they make plans to buy a car, but nobody makes plans for their funerals. Oi! So, Dad, what do you want? He's trotted back into the barn. I get in the car because Mom has now rolled down the window and said, Susan, we're going to be late. Now we're going to be late? We get to Murphy's, and it's the same funeral home where my father worked. So I help her up the steps, and we go in, and we go into an empty viewing room, and Mr. Murphy is going through all of the arrangements with Mom. Open casket, closed, calling hours, viewing hours, scriptures, music, the whole 9 yards. And she gets it all done. And I'm thinking, great. And then Mr. Murphy says, well, what about Leo? I'm like, oh. And my mother proceeds to plan the grand send-off. And I'm like, was I missing something? So I turn to Mom and I say, I don't think this is what Dad wants. And she gives me the mother look. So it's like, okay. Now Mr. Murphy says, well, let's go pick out caskets. So we walk down to the casket display room, and I feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone. And my mother's like, well, what do you think of this one? What do you think of this one? And always with Susan, don't lay me out in white because it washes out my color. Holy geez, pink it is, Mom. So she chooses her casket, and then she chooses Dad's. And my only comment was, that's an awful big box for a handful of ashes. We climb into the car, we get into the car, I get her home, get her up the stairs. My mother's only like 4'8". Get her up the stairs, give her a kiss goodbye, and say, thank you for a lovely day together, Mom. I drive back home. I call each of my siblings to tell them about our field trip to the funeral home and how they owe me big. I opened up the refrigerator that night and I realized there was not enough beer in there to take the edge off the day. Over the next several years, we had a lot of informal conversations, usually around the Sunday dinner table at Mom and Dad's. And it included in-laws, it included the older grandkids, and we talked about what we wanted for our grand send-offs. Because it's important to let everybody know, because during that time it's so hard. And it's important for my family right here to know that I want to be toasted, and I want twist and shout for my processional song. My dad passed away March 10th of 2015. And Mom and us kids were able to plan for his funeral and honor him because he told us about his wishes. He was cremated, but not by the cheap place in Yates County. I couldn't do it. Simple service and no calling hours. And I gotta tell you, the grief from the funeral just pervaded me. I had lost my touchstone. A few months later, my husband and I went out to dinner. And he's gently holding my hand. And I look across the table and I say, did you buy a new tie? And he says, well, no, this is one of the ones your dad gave me. And I can feel Leo the mortician here and Leo, my dad, there, as I laughed and said, you know, you're probably not the second person to wear that tie. Thank you.